A manhunt for the killer of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson ended this week in the detention of suspect Luigi Mangione. When he was arrested in an Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's, he was found with a 262-word manifesto. In it, Mangione writes that healthcare companies, quote, have simply gotten too powerful and they continue to abuse our country for immense profit because the American public has allowed them to get away with it. Outside a Pennsylvania court yesterday, he shouted to onlookers.
And completely out of touch and an insult to the intelligence of the American people and the lived experience.
So, a lot of conversation about this, Batya, on the internet about people making excuses for a killer, or that's at the very least. I mean, some people actually celebrating him. And I'll tell you what, I thought this might be like the Bin Laden letter on TikTok, maybe just a few people. I have now run into it in my actual life outside of the internet, a chain of people who don't exist in our world, in the journalism world, saying things that to my response to it was, this is moral idiocy and reprehensible, and you guys should all be ashamed of yourselves. I mean, what do you make of this? Because I think this is a real phenomenon. People are actually defending him and making merch, et cetera.
It's very hard because there are two very powerful competing things at stake. And it seems like one is overpowering the other. The first is what you alluded to, which is that murder is always wrong, that it is inexcusable under any circumstances to intentionally take an innocent life. On the other side, we have the fact that our healthcare industry is a disaster, that a lot of people have had loved ones and themselves deeply impacted in horrific ways by an industry that profits off of human misery and suffering. Now, these are both totally true, and because of what Luigi Mangione is accused of doing, they have been put into competition with each other. And what we're seeing is that a lot of our fellow Americans are allowing the one impulse to overwhelm the other one. I think that's sort of what we're seeing.
Look, you know, it's funny that all of these people that I see on this text chain who are now making an excuse for somebody who's an executioner and somebody who decided that he was the judge and the jury too. It's a very strange thing because all of these friends of mine are liberal people. They're people of the left. And I had to respond to them initially saying, I didn't know you supported the death penalty. Because they do support the death penalty now for certain things, right? If I don't like the issue, now I put something to them too. Would we be having the conversation? Because I saw this morning, the New York Times had yet another story about our broken healthcare system that was precipitated by a cold-blooded murder of a father of two. And you love a class angle on this. Let's give it a class angle. This kid was a spoiled, rich brat who went to a $40,000 a year private school. His family, wealthy for generations. The guy that he murdered's father was a grain elevator operator, and he went to the University of Ohio, a public school. So we want to put that kind of, this kid is a privileged little rat, and he deserves to rot in hell and rot in prison and then rot in hell. But I'll tell you the thing about this one of the things that drives me crazy is that you see the New York Times having another article about this. Mark Andreessen, who I think Barry just interviewed, had a whole list of them. This is the conversation. People are upset about this. Let me give you another example. People are generally don't like affirmative action. If somebody who is supporting affirmative action voted for it as a judge, was executed in the street and said, the American people are fed up with this, and I'm going to take it upon myself to get, do you think we would have conversations about the efficacy and the morality of affirmative action? I doubt it. I doubt it very much. And the person who did this, don't pretend what he is. People are imprinting on him what they want. Read his manifesto. This valedictorian is a half-wit. He is not a smart person. Look at the end of this in which he says, we have, a lower life expectancy, but we spend the most on healthcare. We spend the most on healthcare, by the way, because we're a very rich country. And we have, procedures that other countries don't have. We spend a lot, right? Is it, well allocated? I don't think so. But the health outcome thing, it's COVID, it's obesity, it's gun violence. That stuff doesn't have anything to do with the health insurance. And then he says, I don't really know this. Don't saddle it on me at the end. He says, I don't really know. I'm not the expert. You just fucking killed a father of two. And as I said to my friends, You imagine for me for 1 second, all of them are parents going to tell those 2 kids that they don't have a father anymore because some shithead little kid who went to a fucking private school who thinks he knows about the healthcare system and what's wrong with it and how to solve it decided to take it upon himself and kill somebody. And if you're out there defending that, you have eternal shame and should think about that for a second because you're condoning murder of somebody. It's terrorism is what it is. What is terrorism? They're going to try to make sure that every other healthcare official goes out with a phalanx of bodyguards. They should be terrorized because of the job that they do. Everyone speaks very generally about how terrible the healthcare system is. And look, the healthcare system is great. The insurance system is terrible. But they're always talking very broadly about all the people that have died and this, that, and the other. No one's very specific. And none of these people that I've talked to have ever mentioned this before. None of them. On Twitter, and where are you talking about healthcare? None of them. All of a sudden, you're condoning and suborning future murders because of an issue that you've never discussed. I'm sorry, but there's nothing that irritates me more than this. It's the exact same thing as people in the 1960s that were supporting the weatherman and terrorism because Vietnam was bad. This is not the answer, people. It precipitates 1,000 times worse outcomes than, this is, I'll stop there. How about that? I should stop there. I'm out of breath.
I really appreciate the moral outrage you're bringing to this because I am struggling with the reconciliation of these two things in the way that I think a lot of people are, and I needed to hear that because
but the question you have to ask yourself too is, I'm sorry to interject, but who else deserves to die?
No, I
the
don't
Exxon
think,
CEO?
I do not think he deserved to die.
No, I know. I'm not saying you do. I'm not saying you do. But to those people that are celebrating him, you understand how expansive that list becomes. Climate change is hurting people. People are going to die. Communities will disappear. So we should kill the CEOs.
Okay.
I mean, this is wild.
I'm going to steelman the conversation around healthcare, independent of justifying his death, which I deplore, and I think this kid should go to jail for forever. Yeah. But healthcare is different because people encounter this system at their most vulnerable, and it is horrific the way that the system itself has developed in order to increase their suffering at their moment of most weakness to turn a profit. And that is inexcusable. It is barbaric, and it is uncivilized, and it is godless. And so I think, people feeling that emotion very strongly, it's been unleashed by this nincompoop, as you say, this terrible person, this kid who was privileged. I think that his privilege plays a really interesting role here. So what seems to have happened is he posted to his social media an x-ray of a back that had had a surgery meant to fuse 2 misaligned discs that clearly failed. Now, this gets to something the insurance companies do, which is UnitedHealthcare will be very good about paying a lump sum for a one-time surgery. This kid apparently was way too young for that surgery and would have benefited much more from, less interventionist methods, but they always deny those. And I'm not in any way asking for sympathy for him. I don't think he deserves it. I should stop calling him a kid. He does not deserve our sympathy. But this thing that happens where they deny other treatments because they are longer term, which could help more and push people to do things.
We don't know that that's what happened in this situation.
No, I'm saying, but it's that model is something. My father's a country doctor in Indiana. He deals with blue collar people who have chronic pain from working blue collar jobs. This is very, very normal for them to deny people who are in chronic pain for having worked their whole lives treatments that would alleviate that pain. And it's not people who are on Medicare and Medicaid who get shafted because they cover everything. And it's not people who have rich private insurance or who can pay for massage therapies. It's people in the lower middle class. Now, this kid was rich. This kid came from a privileged background. But I think it seems like what happened was he experienced this overwhelming outrage at this situation that many Americans go through and are voiceless and powerless to
not
address.
Not a single one of them has ever committed a murder.
I'm getting to that. I think the way to reconcile these two competing impulses is you think of all of the voiceless working people who have no resources, who have been screwed over by this horrifying, godless system in which rich executives are benefiting from their physical suffering and in some cases the death of their loved ones, and not one of them has ever lifted a finger in a vigilante way, only for this rich kid who could have paid for his own therapies to alleviate his pain, felt the need, to take this kind of action. It is an insult what he did. I mean, I think he thinks maybe, or the people, let's say, cheering him on, think that he was speaking for all of these voiceless people, when it's the exact opposite. It was an insult to their suffering to take this horrific act of taking a life when he was a person who was so much less justified. Not that anybody would be justified, but of all the people, that's sort of where I'm at in terms of trying to reconcile what I think are these two competing, very powerful feelings, which is, on the one hand, murder is never excusable, and on the other hand, the system is also inexcusable.
The alternatives to this, and I don't know what people suggest as alternatives to this, I mean, people are denied care in socialized systems because socialized systems have to control cost too. Things cost money. And the idea that the NHS, or, I knew people that were denied care in socialized medicine countries that had to seek care and pay out of pocket in other places because there's queues. If people who, have policies that create queues and people die in those queues, is that the same thing morally as an industry, which is a pretty low margin industry, actually? I think it's about 6% profit margin is what they operate on. And, I've seen all this like deceptive stuff about revenue. This is how much revenue the company brought in. Revenue is irrelevant. Profit is what we care about. Like, what are their expenses? But they're trying to inflate these costs. Also, do not trust this kid. Your great hero of the anti-private insurance industry gets the most basic facts wrong in his manifesto, which was 250 idiotic words. Do you imagine how excited people were for the manifesto to come out? He's going to be Ted Kaczynski point two. What a disappointment that it was just this rambling thing where he said, United Health is the fourth or fifth largest market cap company in America. It's not even close. It's 20 or something, but it's like, $500 million versus 3 or 4 trillion. That's a basic factual error. Do I trust you, who can't even make a simple factual case, to mete out punishment to people when you do things like that? Why not do it to politicians? Why not shoot Joe Biden for not fixing the American health care, or Donald Trump?
To take this even further, when you get your paycheck, when you work in a country that has socialized medicine, right? Your take-home pay is less than 40%. It's much less because you're paying for that.
Correct.
People wait in Canada for a basic scan for 6 months, right? Who knows what they could what kind of treatments they could have access to if they were here. In fact, people come here from all around the world, countries with socialized medicine, in order to have access to our treatment. That is all completely true. And the system is deeply, deeply broken.
I don't think there's anyone disagrees with that.
The administrative costs of hospitals, it is a cartel.
Yes.
The big pharma, the insurance companies, and the hospital administrative side of things, there is so much waste that comes at the expense of actually helping people. And I'm sympathetic to everything that you are saying. I really am. I don't think that, Canada has the answer or England has the answer. I don't think Americans would accept the kind of two-tier system that they have in Israel, which actually seems to be the best thing that's working. You have a socialized sort of bottom, and then if you have the money, you could pay into a higher. I don't think Americans would ever accept that. So in some ways, we do have a more democratized system because everyone has access to the same care. But you hear these stories. You hear stories of people going into medical debt and losing all of their savings. You hear stories of people having to, split their diabetes medication in half or whatever it is, rationing their meds because they can't afford them.
And I, as a matter of fact, I'm going to leave here, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and go over to a pharmaceutical company who's going to teach me today to use a pump. I saw a stat yesterday, totally separate from everything, about American healthcare, about how in America, access to a pump for diabetics, and this was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, was outpacing Europe by about 2 to 1. So there are, we have very good success rates on certain cancers, better than almost every other country. And it doesn't mean that it's not flawed. It's amazingly flawed. And as a diabetic, I know that. The fact that we have tied our working life to insurance, which, by the way, is a byproduct of socialism, to be honest, because it happened during World War II when there was wage and price controls and the enticement was to give them health insurance. But yes, it's broken in the same way universities are insanely expensive and broken. If we allow this kind of runaway growth in administrator costs and everything, this is in a way what you get. The system is not there to be burned down because we do quite well. We have enormous problems. Weirdly, people don't go out in the streets and protest this stuff en masse. I think politicians would listen if everyone went DC every 6 months and there was 1 million people saying, fix this problem, when it doesn't become a political focal point. And it was one of the top 3 concerns amongst voters in the last election. Who talked about it? Almost nobody. You know why? Because it's complicated. It's very, very hard. And it's not just because everybody's in hock to the insurance companies and the pharmacy benefit managers and the blah, blah, blah. It's just what is the solution that is going to work, particularly in a country of this size. And I'll say one final thing before we go. Everybody I talked to, when I was doing immigration stories in Europe, when they talked about immigration, they were too polite to do it. They talked about healthcare because they used to have walk-in and now the hospitals are full. And there are people coming and getting free healthcare who have paid nothing to the system. And it creates this unbelievable anger and a lot of backlogs. I mean, when I was in Sweden, I had long waits, sometimes months, to see certain doctors and certain specialists, to get my blood taken, to get my A1Cs. It was it was a different system.
Yeah, but in the 70s, the average per capita payment for health in America was about $500. And today it's about $12,000. And we are so unhealthy. I mean, that money is going right into people's
We do have better and more
pockets.
expensive treatments now. I mean, in the 70s, you didn't have these fancy MRI machines that cost a lot of money to operate and things like that. So there is that.
But that's not resulting in a healthier
Well, yes. I mean, we
electorate.
are. I mean, this is the thing that I'm not an RFK fan, as anyone who watches this show and listens to the podcast knows. But there is, the reason he's resonating with people is the Maha idea is that we are a fat and out of shape country. There's a lot of reasons for that. In Europe, you can walk everywhere. In America, in the middle of the country, you have to drive to get, anything. So there's a mobility thing. But, we are an unhealthy country. We can deal with that in a lot of ways. It would probably shrink our healthcare costs and make everybody happier too. There's a million reasons. I mean, we can't cover all this, but yeah, I'm very angry about the way people have responded to this. And I think it's like a moral calamity. So
Agreed.
well, we agree on that. Right? We can agree on that.
We do indeed.